Okay, so today my 22 push-ups for the last 22 days actually came in handy. We had a cardiac arrest and didn't have the human resources that we normally have due to building fire that was going on. And I ended up doing CPR for, I don't know, probably 20 minutes. So those chest muscles that I've developed definitely came in handy. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of my experience leading up to recognizing that I needed to take some time off from the job. I'll start with kind of how I was before my last call. Um, I guess I would describe myself as being a very angry, aggressive, hostile person. I isolated myself from anybody that wasn't in EMS. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't like being out in groups of people. If I did go out, I was always looking to see who's going to be a problem and who might end up being a liability that I might have to go deal with. And I felt this overwhelming sense of having to be responsible for so many other people and having to look after so many other people's needs, and yet nobody was looking after mine. I felt extremely empty, and I described myself at that time like a body that's gone through an autopsy. When they go in, they take out all your organs and they basically leave just like a hull, a shell of a body. It almost looks like a canoe when they're done. And that's how I would have described myself at that time. I had no emotion left. I was incapable of caring for myself. The only thing that I would express was anger. And now I know that anger is sad's bodyguard. But at the time, that was the only acceptable emotion that you were allowed to express at work. I think things have changed quite a bit since then, and I'm really glad for that. But yeah, I was very emotionally shut down, very, very angry, tired, isolated myself. And like I said, I just felt like I was responsible for so many other people, and yet no one was looking after me, including myself. So leading up to my last night at work, I'd become pretty immune to feeling things for anybody, including patients, which I think is a fairly normal reaction to this job after a while. Because you can't feel bad for everybody, or you wouldn't be able to do our job, right? So, but I stopped having any type of reaction to anything. So, like, no adrenal response. And at the time, I just thought it was because I'd just gotten so used to everything. I didn't know that I had adrenal fatigue and that my adrenal glands had pretty much stopped functioning. And I had a total disregard for my own personal safety. Now, I never put anyone else's safety in jeopardy, but my own wasn't a concern for me. I remember thinking to myself that, being stabbed or being shot at work would be better than being at work or being ran over or all of these other things would be better than being at work. And I remember one night I drank 2 tall cans of Red Bull just as an experiment to see if anything would happen. If, maybe I'd put myself into an SVT and I can go home for a while. I was just so run into the ground and so overwhelmed, but I wasn't aware of it. And I think that was the biggest thing is I always just sort of had this misconception of what PTSD was. I thought it was an acute event and that you were severely traumatized by it and you would know. And obviously that's one of the ways that you can develop PTSD, but it's not the only way. I wasn't aware that you could have it from chronic injuries that built up over time. And I guess I just sort of thought that, I would know it was time to stop going to work because I would just not be able to get out of bed one morning. I'd be in a catatonic state. Nobody would be able to get through to me and they'd send me off to Pinoca. Or, maybe I'd hear like an audible snap in my head and that's finally, my last crayon going. So I wasn't aware of the symptoms leading up to me having to leave work for a while. That definitely required some attention and some therapy. And, had I done something about it months or years prior to, I probably wouldn't have had to take any time off of work. And I probably would have had a much better quality of life. But I really prided myself in my ability to not react to any situations. Like nothing fazed me. You couldn't scare me. Calls didn't bother me. In fact, I was quite bored of work at that point because nothing felt like a challenge. Um, and I was really proud of the fact that I was totally unemotional. Like that suit of armor that I talked about before that we developed to protect ourselves in this job. I was really proud of mine. It weighed 1,000 pounds, but damn you, I've earned it. I've seen some shit and I've earned this suit of armor, and I wore it quite proudly. And well, I think one of the things that saved me and allowed me to go on so long was the fact that I didn't feel things very deeply. And that's what actually ended up being my Achilles heel was that last call. So, I mean, I've seen, lots of bad things, just like we all have. And I know there's lots of paramedics out there that have seen things that are way worse than anything that I'll ever see. And they still just function fine. And I don't know what's different between me and them, but, I can only speak to my experience. But I've seen lots of trauma, and, just bad things happening to good people and bad things happening to bad people. And, none of it really affected me. The things that really bothered me were when good people had bad things happen to them. Those were the calls that disturbed me. The rest of it I could sort of rationalize because these were people making bad decisions, right? These were people that were driving drunk and hurting themselves in an accident. These were people who were doing drugs and, having bad side effects of those drugs and, getting stabbed in a drug deal or, I don't know, like those calls I was able to just put behind me and not even think twice about them. And so I took a lot of pride in my ability to not give a shit about anything. And, I was ignorant enough to think that was something to be proud of. And now I know that that's not the case. But, and oddly enough, since then, I've seen some pretty significant things as well that should be traumatizing to most people, but haven't bothered me. So that's why it's so weird that this particular call would just take me out at the knees. So it was a night shift, and we got called in to assist another agency with doing a next of kin notification. And unfortunately, this poor lady, young, my age lady, was 7 months pregnant and had a young child, and had unfortunately been informed over the phone that her husband had committed suicide. Now, obviously, that's not the way that somebody should find out. So there was a big scramble to get to her house and to, fix this as little as you can fix that situation. So we were asked to accompany another agency in because of the fact that she was 7 months pregnant. And at the time, like I said, I was completely emotionally shut down. Nothing stirred me. Nothing made me feel anything but anger. Like you could have put a gun to my head and I would have just smiled at you. Like I had no fear response. I had no happiness. I mean, I hadn't felt happiness in years. I had no idea what happiness was. So I went into this call and this poor lady comes out and she's super pregnant. Obviously she knows that because we're there, that the phone call that she'd gotten must be true. So she drops to her knees and starts crying. And I remember thinking to myself, could you just please get up? Could you just get up so that we can get this over and done with? And I remember immediately stopping myself and saying like, holy cow, Jessica, that's awful. That's crossing the line. So I remember helping her up and thinking to myself, this might be really bad. And I helped her into the house and we sat down. And at the time, all I could think was, I'm not the right person to be here to do this with her. She deserves somebody so much better than me. Like I am so completely shut down. How could I possibly help this poor lady? And she really needs somebody who's compassionate and caring and not me, this, miserable, angry human being that is incapable of feeling any joy or love or, able to show any compassion to anybody at that point in time. And I felt awful for her. And I was so angry that I'd been put into that situation. Now, initially, I just thought I was going to go in and do a physical assessment and call her a day, get the hell out of there. But I realized that I was the only person that was in the room that was capable of helping her out. And that scared the shit out of me because there were 4 other people there and any one of them would have been better than me, and nobody stepped up to the plate. And I started to really get upset for her that she got me that night. I just didn't think it was fair. This poor lady ended up with the worst paramedic in the whole city that she could have possibly gotten in this scenario. And I remember sitting there with her, looking at her and thinking, like, you could be me. The only thing that this poor lady did was fall in love with somebody with mental health issues who became abusive to her. And to try and fix the problem, she got a restraining order against him, thinking that that would help him have to go in front of a judge and get court-appointed therapy. So because she tried for so long to get him help and he'd refused to do it, this was her last course of action. Like, she had to get her kids out of there. So he went and sent her a bunch of text messages saying, like, if you don't love me and you're not going to be with me, then I'm gonna kill myself. And it's on you. It's your fault. And I remember her showing me these messages and looking at me like, is he actually dead? Like, can you send an ambulance out there to check on him? Is there a chance that he's still alive? Can you please do something for my dad? Like, how am I supposed to have this baby by myself? How am I supposed to raise my kids on my own? And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I have nothing great to tell you that's going to make any of this better. And unfortunately, I knew that he was deceased, but because it wasn't my information to tell her and it wasn't information I knew firsthand, I didn't want to say anything in case I was wrong. And I felt really bad that nobody else there would tell her, like, yeah, I'm really sorry, but he is deceased, and allow her to start that awful shock grieving process that I saw her go through. And I remember sitting there with her and reading these text messages and thinking to myself, like, God, Jessica, you have to, like, don't screw this up, because if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, you're going to make this even worse than it already is. And she's going to remember everything you're saying to her at this point, because it's the worst night of her life. And as we're sitting there and I'm trying to come up with some words of wisdom that is just going to make this not as awful as it is, her son comes out of a room and sees the police standing there and thinks that one of them is his dad. He must have looked like him. So he's yelling, "Dad, Dad, Daddy, Dad." And I'm watching this poor woman's face as she's processing that this will never happen again. And I was like, oh my God, I wish to God you'd gotten any other paramedic but me. And I felt awful for her, because she could have been any one of us. She could have been any one of us. She could have been me. She could have been you. She'd done nothing wrong to put herself in that scenario. And she started asking me all these questions, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to say to you. And, I remember what I said to her. I remember telling her that in situations like that where someone's been abusive to you and you have kids, you have to be a good mom and you have to get those kids out of there. Like, it's one thing to put yourself in that situation, but it's a whole nother one to leave your kids in there. And I said, you're such a good mom for getting your kids out of there. You have to know that this isn't your fault, that this is a very selfish thing that he's done, and to blame you for it, I don't even know what to say about that. And I just feel like you're such a brave woman to get your kids out of there, because so many people are too scared to leave. And I said, unfortunately, what ends up happening some of the time with these guys is they think that if you're not going to be with them, then you shouldn't be with anybody else. And they'll end up killing you, and they'll end up killing your kids. And I said, there's a chance that tonight, by you not being with him when he did this, that you potentially have saved your life and your unborn child's life and your son's life. And that's the thing that you need to remember. And, that's the only thing I could think of to say to her. And I decided, after sitting there with her for a while, that, we needed to take her to the hospital so that she could get some therapy and that the baby could be monitored, because obviously there's a huge concern that she's going to go into preterm labor. And with watching her process the information, that was, a big fear of mine. So we had a pretty candid heart-to-heart conversation on the way to the hospital, and it was gut-wrenching. Like, it was absolutely gut-wrenching. And I think the thing that got me the most is that I felt so bad for her. And I'd been so immune to feeling bad for people for so long, including myself. I had no compassion for myself. I had no empathy for myself, let alone anybody else, that this really hit the only hole in my armor. And I had no idea how to cope with it. I was so devastated for this poor woman. And I felt so bad for her that she got me that night, that I was like, this bugs me, you know? And like I said, I've been to so many brutal calls that you'd think would mess a person up before, and I have been to them since. And it was the fact that this poor lady just had such a shitty thing happen to her, and I could do nothing about it. You know, I basically just sat in the ambulance and held her. Like, I just didn't know what else to do for her. And I don't know to this day if any of that helped, but, you know, I just remember leaving that call and thinking, like, something has profoundly broken inside of me. And I don't think I can keep doing this anymore. Like, I need some time off. And I was really angry at being put in that situation. I was really angry that I'd been asked to be on that call but just sort of left to hang in the wind as far as like dealing with this. Now, I realize that next of kin notifications are part of our job, but you have to understand that most of the time when I'm doing it, it's a code that I've worked. So I know that when I go to the family and tell them that I've done everything possible and there's nothing else I could do, I know that I'm saying that with 100% sincerity. And that takes a little bit of the edge off for me. I still feel awful for the family, but I know that it's part of my job. I have to do it. And it's never bothered me before, but this was not a code that I had worked. This was not something, you know, this had actually occurred in a totally other town. And I don't know what, you know, it was just the circumstances. It was the rawness of it. It was the fact that this poor lady could have been me or any one of us. And just realizing her come to terms with, you know, having to go through labor on her own, having to give birth to this baby on her own, you know, having to raise her kids by herself. I know she had family that loves her and cares about her and will be there for her, but still, it's not the same as, you know, planning this life with your husband and then all of a sudden he's gone and he's blaming you for it, despite your best efforts to try and get him help. Yeah, it was just so hard for me to process this. And I was really angry at the person that I thought was responsible for this, the person that I felt like had put me in that situation. And I remember seeing that person later on that night when I went and did a stabbing. And I mean, there's so many of them downtown that it just didn't even faze me. I was just, you know, whatever, there's another one. And I saw this person, and I remember thinking, like, I'm going to walk up to him and I'm going to punch him in the face for doing this to me. And then I remember thinking, like, well, I'm going to go to jail. Probably going to get the shit kicked out of me in the meantime. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, but that's okay. Because at least I won't be angry anymore. He'll know that he fucked up and did a bad job. And I won't have to be at work anymore because, quite frankly, at that point in time, being in jail or being in the hospital were both better options to me than being at work. And you might think that sounds crazy, but I'm going to tell you, I know that there are other people that feel the same way. I know that. So, obviously, I didn't do anything. And I remember thinking to myself, like, it's time. It's time to go home and not come back. And I remember riding in the ambulance and the patient looking at me. And I mean, this is an urban outdoorsman who's, you know, used to living a pretty rough life. And when they look at you and ask you if you're okay, probably time to do a little, you know, gut check on what you're doing. And I just remember there's two cops with me in the ambulance that were so kind and could see that I was visibly not okay. And were asking me, like, what happened? And I was telling them the story, and they were like, we're so sorry that happened to you, and it shouldn't have. You know, is there anything we can do? Can we get you a coffee? Can we, you know, and they just sat and listened to me, and I just remember thinking, like, they could have told me that I was crazy. They could have told me to go home. They could have been the way I would have been. And they were both so kind to me, and I still appreciate that to this day. But yeah, I knew that it was time to go home, so I did. I had a 3-day migraine. There wasn't enough drugs in the world to make it okay. And yeah, I remember sitting on the couch for like 3 hours just holding my head because I was too scared to move, because I was worried that something was going to break in my brain. And yeah, I mean, prior to that, one of the other symptoms that I've been having was massive migraines for days on end after night shifts. And I should have known, like, I'd never had migraines in my life before. I should have known that that was an issue. Or the fact that I come home so angry that I would take 2 sleeping pills, 2 sedatives, and drink a half a bottle of wine while I'm pacing around in my house at 6 o'clock in the morning after nights because I can't calm down because I'm so angry. Like, that should have been a sign. That's not a, that's not a healthy thing to do. And now I realize, like, that's unfortunately potentially a normal reaction to really abnormal events and lifestyle and, those types of things. But obviously none of those things were healthy, and that should have been a red flag to me that something was really wrong and that I needed to get help, and none of it was. I just thought it was part of the process, and it was just something I had to suck up and deal with. And I think that's the thing I was constantly telling myself, is just suck it up, like walk it off, deal with it. And obviously I know now that that doesn't work. But yeah, thank God I went home that night and said to myself, like, Jessica, you take so much pride in being a good paramedic. You need to stop yourself before you do something to ruin your career, because you've worked so hard and you tried so hard and you've done, what I've done the best job that I could, that I didn't want to jeopardize that, because I finally let my anger and everything get the best of me. So thank God that I knew it was time to pull the pin before I did anything that I would regret, because up till then, all of the things were just thoughts in my head. I hadn't acted out on any of it. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I was at. I probably should have left, or not left, but gotten help, 2-3 years prior to that. I should have told somebody that this is what was going on. And I didn't, because I just thought I was tougher than that and stronger than that. And the reality is that I am tougher than that and I am stronger than that. And I didn't need to put myself through that to prove that to myself, because nobody won out of that deal. I'm happy to say that there is life outside of EMS, that there are jobs that paramedics are really, really good at that do not require you to be in EMS. But I'm also happy to say that I'm back at work, that, when I get the really what the hell calls, that I feel like I'm in my glory. I still take a lot of pride in trying very hard to do a good job. And I love the hell out of my coworkers. So, it is possible to come back from all of these things. I guess it's just a matter of not giving up and taking the time to take care of yourself. I think that's the biggest thing that's changed. I know what my triggers are. I know when I've had enough. I know when I need a timeout, and I'm not scared to ask for help anymore, because asking for help is not a sign of weakness. So anyways, I hope some of this resonates with some of you, so that if you see some of these signs and symptoms in yourself, please go get help. Please, 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 because you don't need to suffer through this. You don't need to do this the hard way. There is no shame in saying, I need to take care of myself. That suit of armor that we carry around thinking we're so tough and we're so awesome because nothing bothers us, that's actually killing you. It's killing your soul, and you will pay the price for that eventually. Your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, all of that is paying, and you might not know it, but you're paying out big time. So stop yourself before it's too late. Thank you so much for all the support that I've gotten from all these videos. Thanks for watching all of them. And I really appreciate all my friends that took this seriously and did it. And yeah, it's been an interesting challenge. I'm really glad that I've had the chance to talk. It's definitely been cathartic. So, hopefully other people have gotten something from it, but I know that I definitely have. Anyways, thank you very much.